Richard, hi, good morning. We just did a quick around the room if you want to introduce yourself.
Richard Nelson, rep from Orleans One Derby, first year.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And then just so that we all know who else is in the room, I think we've met Amy before. And
I'm William Cole. I'm interning with the Lieutenant Governor, so I'm just kind of here to take notes and see what's going on.
good morning, Kelly. All right, so why don't we then, we'll turn it over to Jake and Ellen, and Abby is here as well. We're going to spend the next roughly 50 minutes, I think, just getting a high level, maybe dig in a little bit to the farm to plate. This is going to be this will be the first of several presentations that we hope to hear from you all over the next few weeks. But we're going to start with the basics, I guess.
Yes, correct. So for the record, I'm Jake Claro. I'm the Farm to Plate Director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. I'm a resident of Berry City.
And I'm Ellen Kaler. I'm the Executive Director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and we administer the Farm to Plate investment program that you're going to hear about. And I live in Starksboro.
And I'm Abby Willard. I'm the Director of the Ag Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And I live in Heinsberg, but grew up in Miami.
I was gonna say I grew up in Sunderland, so my parents, Representative Durfee is actually my parents' rep. So, yes,
Vermont.
yeah.
I think actually, just for the record, it's your sister who, I'm your sister's rep. Your parents live on the other side of Sunderland.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that correction.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen before we kick off here. Make sure that this actually works. There we go.
And this has been provided to you, so it's on your website.
Yep, yeah, so the full slide deck has been submitted as a PDF for reference afterwards. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having us. It's always a real pleasure to speak with the committee. And as Representative Durfee alluded to, today we're going to give sort of a high-level view of the Farm to Plate Investment Program, just to give some context, a little bit of history, and then we're going to be back here to get into more depth around some of the data and sort of status of how we're doing in our in the agriculture and food system in Vermont. So I've tried to restrain from including too much in this presentation. You might have some questions that we're definitely going to be addressing in the weeks to come. So just wanted to put that out there to start. Yeah, so this will be an overview for you all about the Farm to Plate Investment Program. The first thing I wanted to just convey and communicate is that the investment program is in Vermont statute. So you can find it Title 10 and subsection 330. So this is part of the statute of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. And there you see, and you can find more information about all of the specifics of what's called for in the program in the statute itself, including some background on the creation goals, tasks, and methods. And while we're going to talk today and really focus around the plan that is on your desks here today, I think it's really important to understand that we're actually in the second 10-year phase of having a food system plan here in Vermont. So the statute was passed in 2009, and it tasked the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund with creating the strategic plan for agriculture and food system development and establishing the Farm to Plate program to fulfill the outcomes of the legislation. And so the original outcomes as passed in 2009 were to increase economic development in Vermont's food and farm sector, create jobs in the food and farm economy, and improve access to healthy local foods. So big economic development component and also a food access component to the objectives and outcomes of the legislation. And to note that we're in the plan as it was developed in 2009 and as it is represented here on the tables today, takes a full food system perspective. So we're really trying to look at, when we're talking about economic development in farming and food, when we're talking about food access, we're really trying to look at everything from farm inputs, soil, seed, land, water quality, to production. What are we making? How are we making it? To processing? Do we have capacity to process products? Where are there gaps and opportunities? How is that food distributed? Are there gaps in distribution that's preventing market access for farmers and food producers? Then looking at like the retail side and the market side. So where are people consuming local food? And then and also how are people able to access it? Can they access it? What are the constraints to that, whether they're financial or transportation or otherwise? And then even, as we're all eaters, we don't always eat everything that we purchase or have access to. And so there's got to be a component of nutrient management. So how does that food either get composted or donated if it's still viable to consume? Or how do farms themselves manage the nutrients that they have?
Mind if we pause
Yeah.
for questions on that?
Just thinking back to the slide before, Jay, in Title 10, that establishes this, what's the guidance on funding? I mean, it could be exist but have no dollars potentially, or it could, the sky's the limit, right?
Yeah. The provision, and Ellen could add some more detail if I don't get this right, but is that the jobs fund, there's no guarantee of funding in the statute. It tasks the jobs fund with the administration of the program and says that we can remove ourselves from that task if there's not a allocation of at least $100,000. Yeah. You have anything?
That's exactly right.
And there is an annual appropriation that comes through the Agency of Agriculture to Farm to Plate Network to Vermont Sustainable
It's
Jobs
been
Fund.
based for how long now?
It went up to 200,000 2 years ago. We're in the second year of base going up from 100 to 200,000. So for about 10 years, it was 100,000.
And that's just a recognition that costs have gone up. So administering the program would have cost something 10 years ago, but now it costs more.
It's actually because we lost a $100,000 funder that went out of the foundation, was a spend down. And so we actually, you could say that there hasn't been any increase from a pure, our budget has grown. It's now about $1 million project budget. And so that piece of it hasn't, it's been really important to have that state funding as being so stable. It provides so much. And we're raising a lot of additional money every year to do this program, so.
I would say that base allocation doesn't cover all of the costs of the program, either at 100,000 or at 200,000, but it's that consistent contribution.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, this question might come up, just a percent breakdown. So more than 50% of our total funding is coming from foundations. 30% is state, but that's not just the base allocation. There might be project grants that we get through Working Lands, for instance, in certain years. 13% is roughly federal, and that varies year over year. And then 5% we have some fee for service, some event kind of revenue, and some sponsorship dollars.
We're good at piecing things together.
Yeah, and nearly 70% of what we raise is going to projects and implementation. All right. So yeah, for some of you who may be new to the committee and may not know this history so why was this passed in 2009? Why create a 10-year food system plan? Why the Jobs Fund? So 2009 was a time where there's a convergence of real price and earnings crisis in the dairy industry. All-time lows in milk prices and net earnings per cow. And this is coming after what was also a difficult 2006. So a lot of difficulty in debt service. And this is 2009 is also Great Recession, housing crisis. So there's just a lot of concerns financially in the industry, in the state. and a lot of difficulties caused by these price declines and net earnings declines as well. So that's happening. So there's a lot of concern surrounding the dairy industry, but there's also a lot of new, emergent, exciting things happening in local food. So this was the time where farmers markets were really starting to crop up and gain momentum. This was when we had a lot of new food hubs forming in different parts of the state, or even incubation spaces for food processing. The artisan cheese industry is really starting to take off, farm to school programming. So there's this contrast of a lot of new, exciting things, but kind of not certain about where they may be headed or how to best support them, and difficulties experienced in our largest agriculture industry in dairy. And so there's a recognition that entering a new decade with pressing challenges, exciting opportunities, and realizing there's no plan, there's not enough coordination, and funders and legislators needed guidance about what kind of policy is going to get us to our strategic needs, our strategic goals, support ag and food systems, and what kind of funding investment is needed. So that's and it's, I think, important to note that rural Vermont and the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, really helped to bring this to the legislature as a priority. They advocated for the creation of the plan, and a number of key legislators then sponsored and took hold of that idea.
One other important and very interesting, I think, factoid about that time was that this was actually a joint legislation by House Commerce and House Ag, Senate Economic Development and Senate Ag. And that was really the first time that both committees came together on a piece of legislation like this. And literally someone from Commerce, the committee, was sitting in on House Ag for testimony and sharing that testimony back and forth between the two committees. And it was because of this recognition that agriculture development is economic development. And that was really new at that point in time. But that was not part of the conversation before we started talking about this farm to plate investment program.
Yeah, we'll next week for sure get more into the economic development of how expansive and impactful agriculture and food is to Vermont's economy. So the plan was released in 2011, and just for you all to know that, as part of our administration of the program, we created the Farm to Plate Network as a mechanism to implement the plan. So we didn't want this to be another plan on the shelf. We wanted to make sure that we acted together to implement it in various ways. And so over 10 years, from 2010 to 2020 or 2011 to 2020, we have been involved in a number of different projects, initiatives, bringing people together in different ways to form new partnerships, working in meat processing, working in grass-fed beef, helping town planners with food and ag planning. So a lot of different facets to how we've implemented and a lot of different types of projects that we've been involved with over the last decade in order to implement the first plan. And yeah, not to go too deep into this, but just at the macro level. So from 2010 to 2020, Vermont's food system economic output expanded from about 7.6 billion to almost 12 billion. The pre-COVID food system employment, and next week we can get in kind of more in the nuance around this, but so around almost 6,200 net new jobs were added to food and farming employment. Food and farm employment, food system employment employs more than 65,000 Vermonters directly, and that's about 11,500 farms and food-related businesses. So, huge imprint in employment and establishments that and economic input that farming and food has in the state of Vermont, and saw some real, meaningful growth over the last decade. And then we have also, we have consistently collected data around local food purchasing. So how much money are Vermonters spending on food that is produced here, and how is that changing over time? So that went from an estimate from 2010 to 2020 of $114 million to 371, which is more than, and we'll get into the nuances around the calculation of this percentage next week, but that's more than 10% of total food purchases in Vermont are local food. So a really robust marketplace that exists here in the state. Vermonters are really committed and bought into supporting local food, and that has increased over time in the last decade. And so as a result of that, if you look at it by market type, we can say that local food is more accessible to more Vermonters through various market channels or even charitable food. So direct to consumer, grocery, restaurants, K-12, higher ed, hospitals, and charitable food have all seen growth in local food purchasing over the last decade. So more Vermonters have access to more local food across the board.
I've got a question, Representative Supranant.
Yeah, thank you. This is great also. And could you dive in a little bit more about what you think accessible means in terms of that distribution process of how you think it's actually getting to Vermonters?
Yeah. It's a good question. And I think there's a couple different ways. So one would be, is it available in places that people purchase their food? So that's one interpretation, but accessible is also, do people have the financial means to not only buy local food, but also to provide food just in general for themselves to meet their needs. And it could also be do they have the physical locations around them to purchase? Do they have the transportation resources? So all of those factors go into, and actually when we get into the goal section of the plan, it outlines that a little more clearly around like access is financial, physical, it could also be educational. So yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Are there barriers to getting our local food into the traditional supermarkets? I mean, I realize a lot of the small town stores gladly embrace local food coming in to be sold without charging them a shelf spot or something like that. Is there barriers, something like a Hannaford's, a Shaw's?
Yes. So you alluded to, I mean, one of them is that for some of those, larger grocery stores, they're going to charge you for shelf space, and that presents definitely some challenges for, a smaller, either farmer or value-added producer in order to get shelf space. Distribution is a big barrier. So do they have a distributor that they're working with or that they can sell to that's going to be able to then service that store? With a lot of Hannaford's, if you're selling to that store, you're managing the inventory that you're selling. So you've got to also be visiting the store, managing your products, ensuring that there's enough supply that's meeting the demand of that particular store. So that presents a lot of problems for a small business of any kind. And also in distribution, there's been a lot of consolidation in that industry. So it's, they're oftentimes not looking to pick up new products, or you've got to be at a scale and volume, that can service that distributor that is also presents challenges for small producers in the state. And Ellen might have some more, there's some regional work happening around this because we've identified that as both a huge opportunity because that's where the majority of people are purchasing, but also a huge challenge.
I need to take notes. I got some ideas.
And Representative Nelson, I'll just say, and I know Jake's going to get to this, but that's part of what this strategic plan helps answer for those questions. So there's a specific section that begins on page 109 that is about the opportunities, the challenges, the bottlenecks around reaching retail grocery markets.
Representative Boswell.
Yeah, this is really great. I'm wondering on the last bullet point, I served the last 4 years on the corrections committee. And my impression is that our 6 incarcerated facilities don't have a lot of local produce. I mean, I think there was legislation recently about getting milk into facilities that was locally produced. I'm wondering, has that been tried before? And if not, maybe why not? You know, it seems like that would be, I mean, literally, this is a captive population that should be having, I don't mean it as a joke, but it's a population that should, you know, they should be having access to good food too. And yeah, I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
kind of address it first,
Yeah.
and I'm sure Jake and
Yeah.
Ellen have additional.
Yeah.
So part of the work that the Farm to Institution kind of collective effort is happening both in Vermont at the Agency of Agriculture and across the Northeast region is also looking at correctional facilities as kind of that target population of how do we make sure that they also have access to the same nutrition and the same high quality local food. The dairy project, for example, used what was called like market checkoff money from the dairy industry so that they pay into like a marketing fund that then is administered by a state council called the Vermont Dairy Promotion Council. And we took $16,000 of those funds because the agency then administers those dollars to ensure that fluid milk would be made available at all 6 correctional facilities. What we learned in that project was that the majority of facilities had the will and the interest to be able to provide fluid milk. They didn't have the storage space or the infrastructure to be able to provide it. And so the grant funds or the $16,000 that we provided was to solve for that equipment challenge, which is like a modest, need
Yeah.
to be able to offer a regional product. It's not all Vermont milk. It is regional fluid milk. But
Okay.
previously they were drinking reconstituted powdered milk from Texas. And so to be able to offer them a fluid milk has done so much for the morale in the facility, so much for like the nutritional value and benefit. It had already been happening at the women's facility as of a few years ago, which you may remember that history as well. But that is, I think, emblematic of what we experience with institutions is that it sometimes is something like there's not processing space within the kitchen to be able to store and then cut up whole food. So it's easier for them to buy already processed and frozen product. Or it may be that they don't have the labor force to be able to cut up and do more value added processing of whole food that may come directly from a farm. The correctional facilities have been very open in many locations to being able to turn it into like a training and professional development opportunity.
I think they do have culinary
And they
programs. in
do
a lot
have
of
all these programs
facilities, yeah.
already, that they could kind of target local food. There have been farms that have been willing to sell product to the correctional facilities. Sometimes they're seconds and have it as part of like when they have a bumper crop of a particular variety, they make it available to the correctional facilities. That's been happening in the St. Johnsbury Correctional Facility for years. Which is again, a little bit about the relationship between the farmer and the incarcerated population and the facility having sort of a champion that wants to take the effort and figure out the relationship and then the logistics within the facility. Price point is always a challenge in our institutional markets where they have limitations of what their budget is around food procurement. So we see that both in K through 12 schools and in correctional facilities, less so, but at times still the same case in healthcare and higher education. So I don't know that it's like a forever structural challenge. I think it's a little bit about finding the success and then choosing to make it a long-term commitment.
Would it be within the sort of purview of what this program intends to develop like gardens and gardening where some of the people that were incarcerated were actually growing some of the food, which they would then be using the facilities, or would that, or not?
We've had many of those conversations over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
And some facilities have been interested, others, they don't have the space, some it fits with their programming, other times they've determined that it's not the priority within kind of the programming that they're offering within the facility. So I think it depends. It's sort of like the conversation we have with schools and childcare facilities around having gardens. It really has to be led by someone from within that has the desire to do it and then, be the champion to ensure that it happens. But I think the resources are available to be able to cultivate those relationships if they wanted to.
We've had conversations about farm to institution, that channel, not just correctional facilities, but schools, hospitals. And I think that there's more we can talk about there, and that may come up in,
Yeah.
your presentation.
Yeah.
So Representative Lipsky has a question, and then we should probably give the presenters a chance to move through their slides.
This is sort of just my understanding, your first two bullet points don't have the local word in them. So for total economic output
Mhm.
for Vermont's food system, does that include all foods that are
Yeah,
consumed as opposed to
yeah. And
whether they come from Battle Creek, Michigan or San Joaquin Valley?
so I hate to keep saying next week, but there'll be a slide with more of a breakdown of how that breaks out by, so some of this is farm gate sales, some of it is food manufacturing, there is distribution and wholesale. Yeah, so we can kind of parse through, yeah.
And then on the last discussion Michelle brought up. We took testimony last couple of years from Salvation Farms that were a large scale gleaning operation, and they specifically supplied correctional institutions unable to supply schools, but had.
Yeah.
I have played that role. I don't know if they're currently playing that role. But yeah, we could,
But that was Vermont produced,
Yeah,
fresh, more nutritious.
yeah, and that's come under they call it the Vermont Commodity Program. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna see if I can move to the next slide here. There we go. Get that away. So just quick kind of assessment of how did we do in implementing strategies from the plan. So from the first plan, so about 80% of high priority strategies were fully completed, or critical components of them were underway or partially completed. And then of the roughly 20% that were not completed, some of them were about 10% were considered to be no longer relevant due to changing circumstances. And then another 11% where no action was taken. Those strategies would still be valuable to implement and likely carried over into this into our current plan. So we did a good job as a state of implementing the strategies that were outlined in the first plan. And then just as an assessment of how did we do as an organization, and also how did members of the network benefit and find value. So these are ranges across from 2014 to 2020 that we surveyed membership. But clearly folks were finding value, whether it was through information, relationships, or advancing their own goals in partnership with others. The network was also effective in implementing or helping to implement the plan. And the quote there from Richard Burkfield at Food Connects down in Brattleboro, I think captures the sentiments of a lot of our members in the different ways that Farm to Plate and being a part of the network was beneficial to the work that they're doing. So now we can turn to more to the present and the plan document that is actually on the table here today. So the legislature reauthorized Farm to Plate in 2019. So as we started getting to the end of the first 10-year period, the question came up, is the state going to commit itself to another 10-year plan? And the answer was yes. So the legislature reauthorized the investment program in 2019. And what that did was effectively task the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund with creating a new 10-year plan and supporting the program to fulfill the legislative outcomes. And the outcomes were amended slightly. So if you remember the first three had more of an economic development and then a food access component. We collapsed the economic development outcomes into one. So now it's increased sustainable economic development and create jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector. And then we added more of an environmental and climate resilience outcome, which is improve soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change, and then improve access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters stays the same. So now we do have more of a sort of an explicit or deliberate focus around resiliency and environmental sustainability. We were doing that work. It's very much a part of, I think, what a lot of people in farming and food are doing anyway, but now it's there specifically. And to give a sense of what this document represents, this is not the SJF's plan. This is not the agency's plan. This is Vermont's plan. So we worked in really close partnership with the Agency of Agriculture and specifically the AgDev division. And Abby was a critical part of that, plus many other staff at the agency. But we really focused on creating a plan that represents the perspectives of those whose lives and livelihoods rely on food and farming. That included, in total, 1,500 Vermonters provided some form of contribution to this document. So we had 163 expert contributors that created the 54 product market and issue briefs, which we'll get into a little bit in a minute. 120 food producers participated in industry-specific focus groups. So we engaged with different industry stakeholders and got their input on goals and directions of their industries, what they needed, where they thought the opportunities were. And then nearly 1,200 Vermonters contributed to a statewide survey on the future of Vermont's agriculture and food system. And a lot of the actual input and direct words and phrases that they provided through that survey are actually a part of the vision that is included in the strategic plan. So all to say that this is the state's agriculture and food system plan, and given the knowledge and expertise that's contained within it, really have confidence in consulting and referencing it in your deliberations as a committee. And just to, again, not going to go too in depth on this specifically, and there's going to be opportunities next week to do more of that. But as we did in the first 10-year plan, the Farm to Plate Network, we still support. It still exists. It is still active in implementing the strategies and recommendations of the plan. And there's just some highlights here of some key things that happened in the last year. We are working across many different areas of the food system, helping farm and food businesses with distribution, retail sales, technical assistance. We're involved in a beef on dairy project. We're helping the 5 food hubs across the state with finding distribution efficiencies and infrastructure investment. We had the formation of the Food Security Coalition, which I think those folks will be in here probably next week, or if they have, I think some of the members of the coalition, and VSJF is a member of the coalition as well. And also we're looking at financial and legal feasibility of different farmland access models. So there's a lot of interest in shared equity models. We're doing some analysis around that. And we've also helped to support the CSA and healthcare programs that exist across the state to further develop and scale their programming in Vermont. So a lot has happened in the past year and a lot more to come. And the plan is not only, you'll not only find the plan in the document, or it's not only influencing the actions of our network, but the fingerprints of this exist in many other state plans, reports, processes, and I'm highlighting that one because, again, I think there's a lot of agreement and consensus about the direction that the plan outlines is something that many people have committed to, believe in. Like, we don't need a lot of new thinking around like, what are the issues and how do we, get from here to there? I think there is a sense of clarity of knowing what the priorities are and, where we need to invest, what the challenges are. And now it is really about the doing. So the second thing I'm bringing this up and want to emphasize, particularly with the climate action plan, is that there are many word for word recommendations that are in our state's climate action plan. The climate action plan is now going through an update this year, which there will be some priorities elevated that involve food and agriculture and farming in the climate action plan. And so we have a foothold in our climate policy as well for food and agriculture. And I just, want to encourage all of you that, that ag and food system policy is also climate action policy. And so, there are places where you can find food and agriculture in the climate action plan. And really, I think take hold of that. And there are some real good opportunities to bring, I think, climate resources to food and agriculture in the state. The other things to highlight here that at the regional level through New England Feeding New England, which Ellen can talk more about, this plan is impacting how other states in New England also approach food system development, agricultural development, and how we can potentially work together as states to bring more resources and self-sufficiency to the region. This has impacted the way that the administration, through the Governor's Commission on the Future of Ag, has offered recommendations, has thought about what priorities the state should pursue. And then I'm going to, in the next slide, talk about the food security roadmap. The food security roadmap is a direct outcome of being a part of the strategic plan. So it really has served as a keystone and source of strategies and recommendations in many other state plans, roadmaps, and reports. Yeah, and so now I want to.
No, just one other thing I was realizing on my drive over this morning that also should be on here is that this plan, the statewide plan, also informs the Working Lands Enterprise Board's thinking about investing in farm and food related businesses, just like the Vermont Forest Futures Roadmap does on the forest side. This has always been a foundational document to the Working Lands Enterprise Board as it thinks strategically about whatever the annual allocation is that you all provide. What's the greatest need? How do we shape the actual deployment of those funds to match some of the priorities that we've highlighted in the plan and that we're tracking over time. And I can only say, I'm sorry, I often forget to acknowledge that, like I say we a lot. In the case of this I serve as an ex officio member on the Working Lands Enterprise Board. So I physically bring this plan every day into those meetings because it is so foundational to that work. So.
Good to point that out, in as much as we're going to go see a grant recipients.
Yes, you are going to be coming to that.
Project this afternoon, yeah.
And we is a good word.
It is, it's true. And we tend to be in a lot of things. So we is really easy to just come off the tongue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a place that we thought it made sense for me to kind of just interject for a few moments. And I'm thinking about three messages, one about process, one about impact, and then one about investment. So the process, so the Agency of Agriculture's involvement in the creation of the original plan, but most specifically this, current 10-year plan, was that we had staff review every brief. So the Agency of Agriculture and leadership reviewed every document that was prepared by the subject matter experts within the ag and food system. We sat as a group of kind of program lead once a week, every Friday at 10 a.m., I think it was, or 9, for a year, sort of like developing kind of the process. So it was really a VSJF kind of leadership effort on behalf of the network, but the Agency of Agriculture was along for the effort from the beginning. The outcomes that were outlined in the first plan, were replicated and used as like a foundation for the Governor's Future of Ag Commission. So when that was established in 2021, the governor gave the commission the charge of submitting 3 action plans in 21, 22, and 23, the fall of each of those 3 years. The commission has now expired and the work of those commissioners, which actually Ellen was one of them, has now completed. But the Future of Ag Commission was established by executive order just as this updated strategic plan was released. And I'll be honest, at first there was this conflict of like, well, we already have a plan. Why do we need the Future of Ag Commission? And the vision was that we would take the strategies and the outcomes that were outlined in this plan and use the commission and all of their expertise and connections and opportunity for bringing more like on the ground conversations to be able to make those recommendations and strategies even more personable and have them actually result in program development, budget allocation, and, again, more of that kind of very directed and clear, unified strategy for the state. And I feel like that's what this plan has done from the beginning, is sort of given all of us access to a lot of expertise to be able to say, if we wonder what we need to make investments on, or we wonder where we need to prioritize, it's here. Like the work's been done. Like Vermonters have shared their perspective and their expertise, and we just have to reference this as a document. And again, the Future of Ag Commission did the same thing. The success, I think, of both the Future of Ag Commission and the foundation of the strategic plan was that in 22 and 23, there was over $60 million of both state and federal funds that were directed towards strategies and priorities that were outlined in this plan. And so that meant that like we didn't, again, have to think about or come up with where the priorities were. We actually just needed to continue to share that unified message and get very specific about what the program's needs were and where the resources would come from. So some of it was federal funding out of that 63 million, some of that was state dollars. But it was a very effective kind of plan to rely upon, and then next phase of having the Future of Ag Commission focus there. And we were grateful to see many of the recommendations from that commission plan in the governor's recommend in fiscal year 22 and 23.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
And, there we go. Missing some things there. And yeah, so similarly, and just to describe this for the food security roadmap, so the roadmap is it's an actual priority strategy of the strategic plan, is to create a food security roadmap for the state of Vermont. So this is an outcome of the plan and really is providing more depth and detail to the third legislative outcome, plus providing some complementary aspects to economic development and climate resiliency. So the roadmap really is giving you all the choices for how do we get to food security by 2035, and how do we improve access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters in a variety of ways, through government action, through agriculture, and through community. And so just to understand the context of kind of where the roadmap fits, and to know that it's really providing just even more direction, similar to the way that the Future of Ag Commission reports does, to really get into more details around how we get to that outcome. Because when we created this plan, knowing that food security is a very complicated and complex issue, there were still things that needed to be worked out and determined. And so the process for creating the roadmap did that. And now there is, as I mentioned, a food security coalition, which the Jobs Fund is a member of. And we are happy to testify on issues related to this roadmap as our other coalition members. And I think there's an expectation that the coalition will be speaking with the committee sometime soon. So more to come there. And I think, just as Abby was saying, that this plan has provided a clear foundation and direction. The roadmap does that as well, because it is representative of Vermonters. It had a similar process that engaged with people who either are working in food and farming or who are impacted by food insecurity. And so, yeah, a similar kind of process behind the creation of the food security roadmap.
I would even say, like, ventured that the Ag and Food System Strategic Plan process made it possible to believe that you could have unified vision, unified direction, and identify collaboratively what those high impact priorities were, because the food security community has been working together for a long time. And I think they just needed a model that demonstrated the value of that unified approach. And this is an amazing kind of roadmap to follow also.
All right. Yeah, so let's get into it. So I want to actually now we'll start turning some pages and just kind of flipping through just to give you a sense of how to use it. So what's contained within here is we're trying to take those 3 legislative outcomes and convert the plan converts it into a vision, goals, priority strategies, and then there's these product market and issue briefs that are really the foundation of the document. So I actually wanted to start there. Starting on page 38, and I'm actually going to go to page 41, just the first one, just to give you an idea. So whatever you might have questions about, what is so for this first one, agroforestry. What is agroforestry? Who's doing it in Vermont? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? These briefs are most of them are only 2 pages, so they give you a really quick assessment. They let you know what's at stake, what the current conditions are on the first page, and then on the back side, it looks at bottlenecks and gaps, opportunities, and then provides a set of recommendations. So we do this for different products in essentially like industries, ag industries in Vermont. We do it for different markets, different market channels. And then there's different issues like financing or farmland access that the issue briefs cover. So these are great, whether it's something you have a personal interest in or something you have a lot of questions about, or people come in or talking about an issue you're not familiar with. These briefs will give you a great foundation for understanding, kind of the current conditions, the gaps, the opportunities, and some really specific recommendations for how to support whether it's that industry, that market, or address the issues that are being covered in these. So so I would definitely recommend using the briefs as a source of reference and just quick assessment for you all. Yeah.
And on the very bottom right of the last page in the footer, for each one of these briefs, there is a listing of who was the lead author and who was the group of subject matter experts that participated. And we really wanted to make sure that there were private sector folks at the table, that farmers, food producers, business owners were part of that team. So again, from a confidence perspective, that is who wrote these briefs. We did the editing and the agency did the making sure that everything was in there was factually correct, right? But in some cases, the team of writers actually had a larger group meeting of other producers, for instance, to get their input and buy-in. And so this, in essence, represents these recommendations, the gaps, the bottlenecks. They basically represent probably 80% of what is going on out there. What we were aiming for was for people who read that brief, who really knew the subject, for them to say, yeah, that's about right. That really does catch the essence of it all. So again, from a confidence, you should have confidence in what is in this. The Laura Ginsburg, who you may have had in here already from the Agency of Agriculture with the Dairy Business Innovation Center, she was the lead author on the 8-page dairy brief. And again, she used a whole bunch of folks in the industry to help guide that. But what she has it put together in this document is really actually was produced at the time that she was also really developing what the strategies were going to be for the Dairy Business Innovation Center that she is now implementing. So all these things do intersect and corroborate each other.
And I think it's important point too to, these were written at a point in time and, cover only so much. So, it doesn't have all the answers or the most up-to-date information, but it should provide some good questions around then kind of key indicators or things that you might want to follow up on with folks that are involved in these industries. So that's the first component of the plan. So there's 54 of these briefs that provide a lot of this reference content and form the foundations for the recommendations that are in the plan. And then if you go to starting on page 29, so we're gonna go in reverse here. You'll get to the priority strategies, which if I can find them, which direction am I going? And so the priority strategies you can see as, I'm gonna get there. So there's 34 of these, and each of you'll see these little colored symbols. So each priority strategy is also trying to reference or identify a goal that it's related to, which we'll get to next. But the priority strategies are a synthesis then of recommendations from the briefs. And so these are kind of more succinct ways of identifying, communicating strategies for the state. And there's actually a reference table that's included in another part of the document that will show you the specific brief recommendations that make up that strategy. So just as an example, a lot of recommendations from different briefs were speaking about the need for investment in storage, processing, and distribution infrastructure. So we want to just convey that as the priority strategy is we need to make investments in those things. But if you want to understand like specific industry needs or just know that where is that priority strategy coming from, we've provided reference to the briefs that lead to that priority strategy. So the priority strategies are just a quicker way to kind of understand, what are the things that either the state or programs or businesses can do in order to reach the goals of the plan. So those are the priority strategies. And then the goals, there are 15, which are on pages 13 through 15. Now I'm understanding how I can work backwards with what I'd like to say. Should have dog-eared these pages. Yeah. And so there's 4 goal categories. So economic development, environmental sustainability, healthy local food for all Vermonters, and racial equity. And the thing that I would say for the goals is to use this as a filter. So, are the issues, the policies that are being discussed in the committee, are they aligned with the goals defined in the plan? Is a really quick screen. And so for economic development, that covers increasing economic input, demand for local food, diversifying our production portfolio, providing livable wages, safe and healthy workplace conditions, but also providing businesses with a diverse and reliable workforce with the skills that they need. Environmental sustainability covers things like carbon sequestration, farm ownership, or farm conservation, farm stewardship, and sort of food scrap and other food residual management. The healthy local food for all Vermonters, as I mentioned, this covers the different dimensions of accessibility. So meeting dietary and cultural needs, having financial resources, being able to access locations which are serving food, having the knowledge and skills and resources to select, grow, hunt, fish, and forage, and also having a food system that's resilient in times of emergencies, as we've seen with whether it's climate-related disasters, pandemics, and then with racial equity, is, you know, removing the structures, the barriers, the policies, practices that may exist, that are racist and exist here in our food system in Vermont. So those are the goals, and they kind of provide direction to, you know, where we want to be in 2030. If we've done everything well, these things should be true and should exist in Vermont.
In some of our grant program applications, we ask applicants to identify which ag and food system strategic plan goals does their project address. And so applicants are sort of connected to this document and to this shared vision, but even intimate enough with it that they can identify what goals of this ag and food system strategic plan that their project is addressing. So we love seeing, I mean, we expect to see them, and we do see them from applications every year, which is great.
And yeah, so that I wanted to give you just some sense of context for what's contained here and how to use it. And that is the conclusion of our overview of the investment program, the Farm to Plate investment program. And just a big, you know, really heartfelt thank you to the work that you all do as a committee. This committee has been an essential partner for us, but also just making our food system more viable, sustainable, resilient, and food secure and just. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
And the rest of the team. So we're gonna have you all back, I think, twice next week for deeper dives. We've got maybe 2-hour blocks set aside for each of those. I know that I'm sure we all have questions. And
That's an understatement.
Chairman Murphy.
thank you for holding them. You see, we finished just about on time. And we've got another group of people waiting outside to come in for the next round. And I do want to give people 5 minutes to stand up and stretch. So if everyone's okay with leaving it there, we will jump right into Ellen, is there anything you wanted to say sort of wrap up?
I really hope that you all do come today to the field trip
We are.
at Warwick. It's going to be great, and they are a phenomenal example of how a retailer, actually somebody who was farming, wanted to provide a retail outlet for Vermont food. And it, like, the whole place is Vermont local food, and they are doing an amazing job meeting an incredible need in the community. And they stood up right when they got underway, right as the pandemic was really doing, and they served such an incredible need in the community. And so I'm so excited that you're all going to come and be able to see and experience it. It's definitely a work in progress. I will see if they've got everything in place, but it's going to be a great ribbon cutting. Glad you could come.
We appreciate your letting us know about it and extending the invitation. So great. Why don't let's make this a 5-minute break, and thank